Well, hello everyone, and welcome to part two of Sustainable Schools Research Week. So many of you were on the webinar on Tuesday where we got into results of the project working on strategic energy management for school board portfolios. And today we're looking at rooftop unit replacements, another high potential area for improving energy efficiency across school boards at large. You'll find a number of the themes around looking at energy targets, energy efficiency levels of individual schools will be common between the two sessions, but focused in a very different area. And this whole approach to characterizing energy efficiency of schools is a common theme that you'll see through sustainable schools. But today, let me first acknowledge our sponsors, the Independent Electrical System Operator, Carmichael Engineering and Kilmer Environmental. This work would not be possible without them, and we're quite delighted with how this has turned out. We'll also acknowledge the tremendous work that the school boards taking part in this project have put into the whole thing, but we do acknowledge our sponsors for their technical advice as well as their funding support of this work. So next slide, please. All climate challenge network events, we begin with land acknowledgement, and we do acknowledge with respect the ancestral and unceded territory of the Inuit, the Métis, and the First Nations people that share these lands with us. I'm speaking from the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Mississaugas of the Credit River, and it's our sincere hope that the work that all of us on this call today are doing together will be an honor to our shared responsibility to the natural environment. Next slide, please. Please use the Q&A for all questions and answers. Katia, as you know, follows it like a hawk, and as and where the questions you raise will fit into the flow of the presentation today. She'll interrupt me with those questions. Those we don't get to today, we will respond to formally after the webinar. So please take the time to let us have your comments, your questions, and your answers. If you're having trouble connecting or any other issues related to the webinar, please use the chat box for that. Next slide, please. So our agenda, we're kind of doing the introductions now. We're going to share some information about where the project came from, what was the trigger that led this to become a high priority area for effort and research. We'll share the findings in a summary form at high level to give you an idea of what did we look for and overall what did we find. We then want to share a project development flow diagram coming out of all the feedback and all the comments and recommendations we've had from the participating boards and the sponsoring organizations. We've tried to present this in the form of a step-by-step flowchart that can be used for these kinds of projects on a go-forward basis. We'll extract from there what we think are the key factors that affect just how energy efficient these projects turn out to be. Like some are more efficient, some are less efficient. What have we found so far are the factors that influence that outcome. We then have a bit of a panel discussion. I'm hoping that Chris and Kevin have been able to join us. And then we'll talk a bit about next steps. Where do we go from here with this research and some of the thinking about what sustainable schools will be doing in 2023. So that's our plan, that's our agenda, that's where we'll be going over the next 55 minutes. Next slide, please. For anybody who's new to the idea of sustainable schools, we've been around for over a decade. In the last 5 years, we've been reporting on the energy efficiency of Ontario school boards, and that work now is expanding to other school boards across North America that are interested in ranking themselves against the Ontario contingent and against each other, and getting a sense of where they should be looking in terms of achievable energy and emission savings potential and the actual savings that are being achieved from year to year. So this is very much a data-driven program, but a program that uses the data to identify opportunities for improvement. The sole mandate of Climate Challenge Network is to accelerate greenhouse gas emissions reductions in commercial, institutional, and multi-residential buildings across North America. This research is designed to and does contribute to that work. Next slide, please, Rosa. So the background, again, I think most, perhaps all of you will recognize the report on the right-hand side. That's our annual reporting on top performing school boards. The little box in there, you're not intended to and don't have to read it, but the 20 most energy efficient school boards in Ontario are recognized in there. The benchmarking chart shows all of the 72 boards and their ranking, and we inform, while we recognize the top 20, we inform all 72 boards of where they stand and offer them support and guidance on where perhaps they can focus to move up the charts to make energy efficiency and emissions reduction improvements. This particular project came out of such conversations with boards talking about the number of projects they have where they are. So, Katya, is there an issue around the visibility of the slides? I can see the slide.
I can see everything too. Bruce, maybe you can leave the call and join again and see if that helps.
Thank you. And thanks for chatting. So the large number of projects and rooftop units being replaced every year, it becomes by economic default the HVAC equipment of choice. And the intent here is to say just how efficient can it be and what are the factors that contribute to that. And the aim of the research is to get information in the hands of all the school boards that can help guide them towards developing projects in a way that delivers the best energy efficiency outcomes. Next slide, please. So the goals of this particular project have actually expanded a bit kind of upstream of these kind of redevelopment projects and downstream as well. So it's a bit of a mouthful, but the scope of the work now is looking at planning, design, selection of equipment, programming the building automation system, how that equipment is commissioned, and how performance is measured and verified after completion of the project. So a fairly wide scope, and again, looking for best practices, looking for common factors around what makes the more efficient schools going through these kind of projects, what sets them apart and makes them as good as they are. The aim of all of this work is to build the internal capacity within the boards to achieve better outcomes in terms of energy efficiency and emissions reduction. Here we've been focusing in particular on the project development process. How does the project come into being? How does it unfold? And how does it get concluded? Next slide, please. So there are 6 pieces to the project. I'll show you in a moment. We're right at the tail end of the work right now. 5 school boards with 2 schools each have joined the work. We've gone through in-depth analysis and then with the boards individually, and then brought everybody together in a strategic workshop held on November the 30th to conclude the collective results. We're working now on the guidance document, which is a simple, easy to follow report that will go to, that will be issued to all boards across the province and in fact across North America that become connected with sustainable schools to design, to help them, their internal project teams and their design consultants pick up on the best of what we've learned through this work. The webinar is happening today and there will be surveys conducted during this webinar. At the end, we will be again polling you for your opinions on what of this work you think can be most useful on a go-forward basis, and a more in-depth survey of the 5 participating boards to get their feedback on what did we learn, what can be useful going forward, where can more help be used. Next slide, please. So a timeline, again, we started this work back in the spring, and it's progressed up to this point. The strategic workshop, as I mentioned, was held back on November the 30th. The webinar is today, and we'll share with you at the end the next few steps, getting the guide in use and following up with all 5 boards and all 10 schools to see how they progress over the course of 2023. Next slide, please. So let me share our findings to date. What did we learn from the work that's happened? And again, I'll acknowledge a few times through this the tremendous amount of work that the 5 participating boards have put in to collecting information, to answering our endless questions, to really help moving this towards practical, useful outcomes. The analysis stage has 2 parts. One is, again, working individually with the boards, finding information gaps, some of which could be filled in, some of which could not, which is part of the process coming out of here. What information is it useful for boards to collect over the course of these projects? But the 3 areas we focused on as first, after the retrofit is complete, how efficient is the school? Where we've been measuring, did savings happen after the project was completed relative to the pre-project baseline? But more importantly, how efficient is the school afterwards, after this major capital investment in HVAC infrastructure? Do we wind up with an efficient outcome? And if not, why not? We've collected a lot of information on project details, the design specifications, shop drawings, the equipment used, the air testing results coming back, comparing all of that. We'll share some of that information with you. And then looking, how is this new equipment being operated? So operations controls, building automation, programming, scheduling, those issues. So how efficient is the school? What is the essence of the project? What equipment, what design, what outcomes, and how are the schools being operated? And those things we believe kind of define how efficient each of the schools has become. The strategic workshop simply brought together all 5 boards in summary tables that allow us to do a more complete compare and contrast between the outcomes for all the different schools, what kind of equipment used. And again, we'll share those findings with you in just a moment. So step 1 is with the one-on-one with the boards, which we intend to continue into 2023. And step 2 is bringing those results together and what's the picture that's emerged. Next slide, please. So the 10 schools, we have the 5 boards, and not for the last time today, I'll again acknowledge just how much effort they've put into this and thank them for that. The school names, you can see there how big the schools are. We have 1 high school in the group, St. Robert, with York Catholic School Board there. One of the, we now start to see, if you like, gaps in information, which we believe we've established would be useful for these kinds of projects, and that is built into the proposed project development process that we'll be outlining a bit later in the session. But building automation system access is there, but also important is archiving of data, so you can look back and see how the school was running before and after the project as being the best way of nailing down what happened, what changed, what's good. So minimal archiving across this group of schools. Interval meter data, again, will show you why we think this is really valuable. Only 2 of the schools had electric interval metering. None of them had gas. Both the ISO and Enbridge are on this call, and they're interested in hearing your thoughts about implementing more interval metering as a really important diagnostic tool in, again, figuring out why and how some schools are more efficient than others. And there was no sub-metering across these schools except at Ottawa Catholic School Board. And that system, they simply don't have the capacity to monitor and use it. It's an older system that is not in extensive use right now. So a lot of the data that can help diagnose issues, point everybody in the right direction at the moment is not generally used. And no surprise, you're going to see that showing up in recommendations as to how these projects can be done in a more consistent and rigorous fashion and deliver consistently positive energy efficiency outcomes. So these are the schools. The next slide, please, Rez. As I mentioned, we track trends. So the black vertical lines here are when the project was implemented, when it came into effect, you know, it's completed. And I think most, perhaps everyone on the line now understands the blue dots and the red dots are things that keep me awake at night. So the electricity on the left. Now the red dotted lines are the baseline, that's weather normalized from year to year. The blue dotted lines are the actual monthly usage. So, and we haven't named the schools here because this is illustrative, but again, we're arguing that this is something you should track before and after each project. You can see with the first school there, after the project, the electricity use came down substantially, and nothing to do with COVID. This is a result of the project. You can also on the right-hand side see the gas. In fact, it's not as pronounced a reduction, but those blue dots are all pretty consistently below the red dotted lines. So this particular project saw electricity and gas savings after the fact. The other project, the implementation stage was earlier. It's over on the left-hand side after the implementation of the work. Electricity use actually jumped for a period of time and then came back onto baseline. No real savings, and the reduction you see further on there is due to COVID. But overall, this particular project, the gas use went up, and it stayed somewhat above the baseline ever since. So very different outcomes. And the starting point we're suggesting for all boards is you need to be tracking this through these projects and to see what changes. Next slide, please. Again, apologies to folks who saw this same slide on Tuesday, but this is profoundly important. So while it's interesting to know, did the energy use go up or down as a result of the project, it's far more interesting to say after we've spent this amount of capital, this amount of infrastructure, renewal money, is the school efficient? And Sustainable Schools measures energy efficiency against these metrics. We update them on a fairly regular basis as the general trend of energy efficiency in schools is improvement. You generally are getting better over time, not always. 2019, in fact, there was a setback in gas consumption or gas performance across the province of Ontario. But this, the total energy of an elementary school at 10.5 equivalent kilowatt hours, a secondary at 12.5, and a board administration office at 20.5 equivalent kilowatt hours. These generic targets are based on Toronto weather conditions, but adjusted to local weather when applied to individual schools. And the further adjustments, you can see those listed below. So the boards are good enough to provide us with information every year for Sustainable Schools reporting to make those corrections. But the proposition here is that there's only so much energy that a school building uses, and there's only so many material variables between schools that need to be adjusted for. And generally that all schools should be working towards these kind of levels, these kind of standards, these kinds of targets. And this is where we've this is where we've made the connection between, Robert, see your question. These are all coming from top quartile metrics from benchmark analysis that we run and we update each year. So these are all top quartile levels of current operations, and that's how that works out. Obviously, some data centers and information technology are involved in administration buildings. Next slide, please. So this is the one you need to catch your breath, and I'll walk you kind of slowly through this. But the colored columns on the right-hand side here, the energy savings potential, those numbers relate right back to what I just looked at, what I just showed you in terms of targets. So when you look at Land O'Lakes with 69% energy savings potential and it's red, it's a relatively inefficient school, and to get to the target level would reduce its electricity consumption by 69%. Same with natural gas, it's a 46, but natural gas or the fuel they're converted to gas equivalent, it's a 46%. It's using 1.5 times as much gas or thermal energy as it should be. So you can see we got a mixed crop here on electricity. We've colored green all schools that are within 15% of the electricity target after making the appropriate adjustments, and 5 of them are there. And as you saw, some of them saw significant savings, which we attribute primarily to fan power, but also to air conditioning equipment. The other 5 schools in electricity and all but 2 of the schools in thermal energy are relatively inefficient. So after, again, the investment in these projects still have a lot of room to improve. So is it because of the equipment they installed, the design of the installation, or how they're operating and controlling it is the essence of this ongoing research. This is kind of stage 1 of the research as to what's actually happening out there. So the efficiency really matters. We're looking at the common characteristic of the more efficient schools, and the realization from here is we didn't end up with a really efficient school as a reference point coming out of this work to this point. Looking at everything else, the equipment manufacturer, needless to say, our friends at Kilmer, who again have been tremendously helpful through this project, they're tentatively excited about the fact that the 2 good thermal performing schools, Assumption and Innisfil Central, are both AON units with heat recovery, with heat wheels. But the equipment supplier is there. We haven't found definitive correlations yet. We looked at how many units, how much of the school was affected by the changes, and that information has been refined over time. When the project came into effect, if there's heat recovery at all, and if so, what type, how many of them are gas-fired and how many are hydronic. We're always concerned about gas-fired units. Again, we understand the economics, but you've got no wiggle room as carbon prices and gas prices rise in future. We're interested in whether they have perimeter heat or they're relying upon the rooftop units to provide the heat to the school. And we're also interested in those rooftop units. Do they connect into constant volume or variable volume systems? So this is the summary of the high-level data that we've been collecting over the course of the project. And again, we're looking for and still looking for correlations as to what are the best choices, what are the best practices. Next slide, please. We, in most cases, we're able to go into the building automation systems for these schools and look to see how they're operating. So we've got fan speed on the top here, and you can see the spikes in the morning, and we're discussing with the board how to eliminate those spikes at startup time. But the scheduling is pretty consistent, and you can see the fans aren't coming on during unoccupied periods here, so that's good. Below, we see CO2 levels as a really good indicator of how much outside air is coming into the schools, and you can see the note on the side. The recommendation is we need to be archiving building automation trends and profiles before and after these projects, so that you can make the comparison and you can see what changed. Next slide, please. So running across, looking at the test reports, the supply airflow, CFM per square foot, the fan power watts per square foot, the total fan power is different. So there's a return fan, and in many cases, power exhausts or fans associated with heat recovery equipment in there. So looking where it's available, and you can see the gaps in data there is because of inconsistencies in the test reporting. Some testing contractors provide these things, some don't. To the degree we were able to access building automation, and we showed you that was hard to come by, we got some CO2 levels indicating that in these cases that they're looking fairly good. We've got the hours per day of operation. We've got other fans coming on during unoccupied periods, and we've got the average fan speeds during the periods we were able to look at. And we find at this point, as many contradictions as correlations. So for example, you see the fan speeds are higher at the 2 Simcoe County schools, but you'll also recall they were looking pretty efficient from an electrical standpoint. So again, there's more to be learned, more to be understood from this work as we go forward. Next slide, please.
Ian, just while we're on this, there was a question that came in from Benjamin Ratcliffe at PLDSB about
Yes.
separating out the impacts of COVID.
Well, yes, so everybody's going through those effects, but so we saw the starting point of this work was looking at the 2019 year, the year before COVID came into effect. And at the moment, most of the air handling units, there's certainly issues around greater outside air volumes and longer operating periods. Those have been tackled, those have been addressed through here, but you're absolutely right, Benjamin. COVID has thrown a bit of wild card into everything around baseline setting and measurement, but comparisons between schools and between boards we're still finding meaningful and useful. Looking at interval meter data as the other piece that you remember, only 2 of the schools here had this. This is the comparison between them. St. Robert is the black line at the top that's got a number of portables. We're just confirming the number right now to make that comparison. And Our Lady of Fatima, you recall, it was among the most efficient electrically of the schools. So we like that blue profile. This is coming off the interval meter. It's in watts per square foot. So we divide the kilowatts every hour by the square footage of the school. So you get a direct comparison, but this is really helpful in understanding between seasons in the same school and between schools, the electricity use profile to help understand the relative efficiency and performance of the school. Next slide, please. So, just keeping track of my time here. So we have a proposed project development and implementation process that's emerged from this. We've iterated back and forth with the participating boards and the sponsors, and we put this out there for the consideration of all the boards. And we look forward to your feedback and your comments in the poll that we'll conduct towards the end of the webinar today. But we're suggesting there are 4 stages of here, that each board has relative strengths and weaknesses in each of these stages. And these 4 stages together pretty much define the energy efficiency of the end product. So the pre-work, if you like, pre-project, scoping, defining the project, setting an energy target for where the school needs to be as a result of doing this project, putting budgets together, looking at the extent to which this project integrates with the rest of the HVAC systems in the school. The next stage is bringing the design team. So we had a lot of conversations about design firms, about board standards, the degree to which prescriptive instruction is given, as opposed to relying on the consultants as the experts to be able to come up with the best solutions for individual schools. Then the whole design development process, where integrated design, we're big believers in that you have the right people at the table, you come up with better outcomes. And then finally, the whole commissioning and handover. We're finding significant inconsistencies between the scope of work done for testing and balancing, whether that work is done for the whole school that this new equipment is plugging into, or just for the equipment that's been installed. And if the latter, then how do you verify the overall performance of the school? And then what should boards be doing to verify performance at both the energy use level, the interval metering, the monthly billing, but also through the building automation system on system operations. So we're proposing today for your consideration these 4 steps, and then fleshing out those steps is where the opportunities are for making improvements, and the understanding every board again has strengths and weaknesses in each of these areas. So let's step along to the issues if we could. And I'm happy, Chris, I can see that you're here. Was Kevin able to join us?
Yes, Kevin's on the call as well.
Wonderful. Thank you both for doing this. It's a double duty. You've been working with us now for a number of months on the data, and now and really looking forward to exploring a bit further some of these issues with you. So looking at I want to first kind of walk through the expanded version of each one of what we think are the key factors. And then I'd like to turn to Kevin and Chris to dig a bit deeper into the ones that they think are the most important. And then we'll be conducting a poll across all of the participants in this webinar to get your votes. And we take all of that back in finalizing the design of the guidance document, and in regrouping with the supporters of this project on where we go from here. So key factors. These are the four that we just looked at a moment ago, plus the big question, and what came up all the time is, this is all really interesting and sounds really important, but where will we find the time? Then I guess the other side of that question has always been, if we can't find the time to do it right, when will we find the time in future to fix it, kind of thing. So that is a constantly circular argument that happens everywhere, but we know everybody's busy. So we really have to focus on the areas with the biggest impact. And again, thank the participating boards for helping us zero on the areas that matter the most. Can we do the next slide, please? So here are the 5 of those. And please, everybody on the call, take your own notes right now, because we're going to be asking you for your vote in just a little while. But the coverage of project scope and definition, again, how well does it integrate with the existing air distribution system and the rest of the HVAC systems in the school? And are there times when the opportunity should be taken, notwithstanding budget constraints and time constraints, to upgrade the system as opposed to just the rooftop unit? The whole question of energy targets, interval metering, sub-metering, having that set up before the project, so it's in place, and you've got a baseline that you can measure against after the fact. That was the area, a big area of conversation. Where do you find low carbon alternatives? Again, ideally, you won't be doing these projects again for another 25, 30 years. That goes right through all of the targets in terms of climate goals. Where do you find the low carbon alternatives? How do you weigh them? That leads into cost. It leads into life cycle cost analysis. Where does that fit? And the whole area of pre-work. What do you need to do in advance around building automation, around metering, around maintenance, setting systems and equipment up so that when you plug in the new rooftop unit, it's supplying if you like a refurbished distribution system that's ready to go. So you can see there the notes, a lot of very helpful, thoughtful feedback on this. How do these projects come together? We're factoring this in. We'll look forward to Chris's and Kevin's comments in just a moment. And please, again, look through those notes and think, do you agree with some of those? And importantly, how important are they? How big an issue are they, do you think, in achieving better outcomes in future? Next slide, please. You remember the next stage is the design team. So how prescriptive should you be? Do you have board standards? In this case, one board did have standards that they supplied to their consultants, but didn't always have the time to stay on top of them and make sure those standards were followed, and didn't build those standards into the commissioning scope of work to ensure that you actually delivered what was designed in the first place. So where do you find qualified consultants? A lot of conversation about this variation in consultant expertise as we move into some of this low carbon world. So important discussions, and again, our request of everybody on the panel and our 2 panelists, and to everyone on this call, how important are these things in the big scheme of things in delivering better outcomes? So that's number 2. Number 3. Design development. So as you turn, if you like, your mandate to your consultants as it evolves into the project, who is at the table? Where do you find time to have the right people at the table so the better decisions get made? And decision criteria around equipment selection. There's air source heat pumps are an option right now. Are you looking for gas-fired or hydronic? Are there options around that? One's less expensive, than the other. How is that going to work within the budget envelopes you have to work with? Is heat recovery a good idea or not? What is your board opinion on that? What is the mandate? What is the instruction you give to your consultants, and how does that develop over time? So again, some really helpful feedback and conversations with the boards, especially at the strategic workshop when they're all together. That's when we learn the most, is the back and forth there. But again, budget dominating, so to some extent, budget and time can preclude looking at, if you like, better, more future-looking options. Staff time constraints are a big issue, that with boards having schools spread over huge geographic areas, reliability is a huge issue. They're not inclined to take chances when it's going to be a 4-hour drive to go and figure out what went wrong. And the whole idea of further information around how do you set energy targets? So we're going to talk a lot at the end about standardization, about what would be useful standards for boards to use going forward for these kinds of projects in future. Next slide, please. Number 4, and then we got number 5, and then we get into the conversation. So commissioning and handover, from our perspective, perhaps one of the most interesting areas, because the essence of that conversation is everybody's so busy that as soon as this project is working, got to get on with the next one. So where are you going to find the time to make sure the testing and balancing one was done rigorously, and then what do you compare it against? And who should be responsible for looking at deviations between the design requirements and the actual operating performance at the end? And again, when everybody's running out of time and needs to move on to the next project. The other big area was performance verification, looking at energy use. Who does that? Who's going to take care of that on a go-forward basis? So looking at the energy side through interval metering and utility bills, and looking at operation and controls through the building automation system. So again, if we don't check it once it's just been built, and then the designers have gone and the testing commissioning agents have gone, how are we going to fix it after the fact? So what we heard is there's quite limited commissioning that gets done. It's important to test and balance the whole school, not just the new equipment. And that this whole area of checking for deficiencies in the system, so that you plug that new rooftop unit into a well-working operation. There's no fire dampers down, there's no, all the equipment is working the way it should be. So those key factors 4 and key factors 5. The internal capacity, do you have enough people to do this? And keeping in mind that just about every board in the province has over $1 million a year of savings potential if we're able to do all this consistently across all the schools, not just the ones with new equipment, but all the schools, that they're big numbers. Do we have sufficient resources? How do we make the business case for additional resources? And where do we get access to training so that the resources we have know how to do the things that we're talking about? So I think all the boards talked about internal capacity. One had added capacity to look at these areas and found it quite easy to make the business case because they knew what the savings potential was. Discussion about we don't tap enough into some really thoughtful, knowledgeable tradespeople who are in these schools and buildings every day and have the opportunity to help us. And the turnover in staff makes it difficult. So how well are things documented and so on. So that was the feedback we got from that. So it takes us into a conversation with Chris and Kevin, if we could. Can we just pull up the next slide, please, Raza? So here's a nice summary, and maybe starting with Chris, just because your first name is alphabetically before Kevin's. Looking at these 5 areas, where do you think, which of those areas would you focus on, or is it more than one area where after going through this work, you really think it could have a big impact on the outcomes of the projects that you're building?
Hi, Ian. Well, honestly, I don't know for us, in going through everything and uh, this whole process. I know you've been working with Brent and Mark and Kayla a lot over the last probably number of years, really. In reality, I'm a little bit of a latecomer to the whole process in terms of this this part of the process. But going through everything, I wouldn't say there's one specific. I couldn't pick one of the five that would be a specific piece for us. We've got little bits in every area that I would say has greatest potential for us. Your point a little bit earlier, and one that we made at a previous meeting about the design integration with an existing system. Too often, it's just rooftop units reach the end of its lifespan, and we need to replace that. Whether it's because maintenance is having too many issues with it, we're worried about a complete failure, whatever the situation is, we just replace like for like and move on. Often there is some energy savings there just because we're putting a 20-year, a newer unit by 20 years on it, but really looking at the existing design and everything, and this is where time and budget do come into a bit of the conversation for sure. Getting our engineers in there early to have a look at everything. We talk a lot about testing and balancing, and perhaps doing a testing and balancing prior to the start of the design of a project to find out how that system is performing to begin with, and perhaps making a few repairs to start with to the overall system before we're designing something new in terms of replacement. I think is a big factor for us. And then the testing and balancing on the backside as well. We do some commissioning. We do require contractors to do testing and balancing, but those reports come in, they are reviewed, but the follow-up on action items often falls by the wayside. And our commissioning over the years has decreased, unfortunately, as to what we're asking our commissioning agents to actually do. So we've already identified that as part of some things that we know we need to address. It becomes a question of how do we address that? The manpower aspect is a big thing for us. Our board, I think, is the one you're speaking about, being able to add some people, but adding some key people in some key areas for sure. But just that piece of it is a tough one as well.
That's great. And again, to both you and Kevin, I really appreciate your candor through all of this, that it's been so helpful. Kevin, your thoughts on the priority parts of this overall process, which can have the biggest effect for Ottawa Catholic School Board?
Yeah, so Kevin LaMarche with the Ottawa Catholic School Board. So to continue with the 5 items here, I think we do a number of them quite well in-house, from like a design aspect and our overall mentality towards what our vision is in terms of running efficient schools and just cost-effective measures. But in terms of just going through this analysis of our sustainable rooftops and what we've been doing lately, and it's given us a chance to actually go visit the 2 schools that we had implemented, so Common Glen and Assumption. And just by going through that exercise of looking at those schools retroactively after the project has been completed has given us a good opportunity to find a bunch of holes in terms of our automation system and schedules and performance of the rooftops. So I guess our major takeaway, and what I guess I'm going to try to recommend here, is that we have very limited time doing these commissioning processes and handing over. Once it comes time for September, everybody's trying to get all the construction work done, and likely we're into balancing, our first PD day in September. So it's always a tough turnover when we do significant HVAC renewal projects. But I think there is a valid argument to be made for retroactive commissioning or just retroactive, I guess, analysis of our consumptions post, say, 6 months and 1 year after the project has been completed. So just as an example for assumption, we realized, so the outdoor air dampers on the rooftop units, the wiring was actually disconnected. So
Okay.
we're actually able to fix that the other day, and that the automation system was essentially running 24/7 on our scheduling side for our hydronic heating valves for the perimeter heating of the school. So these are items that we thought were implemented. You know, it's a tough transition from project officer, project manager to our operations side. And we try to do our best with that and arrange meetings so that they're trained and educated on the new system. But it's definitely a tough transition when it's a little bit of a time crunch and we're all learning the same system at the same time. So I think there's very much a good opportunity to go back since 6 months later, find out, oh, are we hitting some sort of energy target, or where do we sit?
Yep.
Let's have another look at this while it's under warranty. And I think there's a huge benefit there from a post-project completion point of view.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. That fits nicely into what we'll talk about after the poll, which is where do we go from here, and what can the next steps, and how does this learning continue from where we've gone so far? I think you both kind of implicitly responded a bit to question 2. So let me skip right, Chris, if I could, to question 3. And with everything that, again, we've gone through together over the past few months, and what we're looking at today, where would Simcoe County Board look for additional help? We'll be regrouping with, again, our project partners on this after this webinar. Where could you guys use further help that could really help you move the agenda forward?
That's a tough question. We can always use a lot of help in a lot of areas. You know, one thing that we rely heavily on our design team, on our consultants, in terms of equipment and best equipment out there. I don't know what other boards are seeing, but a lot of the engineers that we use, they're hard to put this sort of generically, but they get into a little bit pigeonholed in terms of what they're speccing. They've used this on a previous job, it works well there, let's implement this here. So some education of the consultants. A lot of manufacturers or suppliers reach out to us directly, which is good. It's good to know what's out there from an owner standpoint, but when it comes down to the real pieces, we rely on our design team, on our consultants to make a lot of those recommendations and decisions. So bringing them up to speed on what's really out there in terms of good, efficient units that obviously you get what you pay for, but we're all working on a budget, so there's different levels of what can be supplied and still have, you know, heat recovery and those types of things. So we have some consultants passing on heat recovery because it's too expensive. We are trying to implement as much heat recovery as we can with a lot of our units, a lot of the units we're installing lately. But we do hear those. One consultant is saying, yes, we can definitely do that. We can do it through this supplier or these groups of suppliers, and others aren't saying that. So I don't know how that, I guess that's reaching out to some of the partners you have on the call here to get a good blanket of knowledge out to the consulting world as to what's available to help us move forward with some of those pieces. You know, in terms of information, like I said, I'm a little bit of a latecomer compared probably to a lot of people on these calls, but there's a lot of information here that proves very helpful, and our maintenance department does a very good job at
Yeah.
taking this information and working with that. So that's a great resource for us. And internally, we're working on myself and trying to get my team, and we're trying to work a little bit more collaboratively in those aspects as well. But this information coming back to the boards, I think, is a very important resource for us too. So you get into the time and budget constraints, and you tend to think a little bit less about the energy piece of it. It often comes as second or third fiddle sometimes, depending on what you have going on. So having a third party sort of bringing these things to the forefront again I think is helpful.
Yeah, you remind me of a couple of things that came up in the strategic workshop. One was around the possibility of facilitated workshop up front, where, as you said, that kind of knowledge can be brought into the mix with everybody at the table. So it kind of sets the stage for integrated design. So we've seen that happen before, and that feels like kind of a nice idea, facilitated team workshop that sets the rules and kind of answers the hard questions. The other one was standards around, what should the watts per CFM, some of those metrics we were looking at, what should the watts per CFM do in terms of fan power, commissioning specification, building automation system programming specification. So all those thoughts in mind, Kevin. Last word to you before we turn to the audience here of which, as you say, you are very self-sufficient at the Ottawa Catholic Board, but are there areas where your team can be supplemented with a bit of help, with a bit of resources, and what might those be?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think on the energy side, we do have somebody that is responsible for observing our utility consumption, but that's one of his responsibilities with many others. So I think in terms of trying to automate that type of data accumulation is definitely beneficial to create some sort of dashboard where that data can be, put in through the utility and then displayed for us to give us some sort of active display on a month-to-month, or even, with a higher detailed approach. I think that is something that we could benefit from, where, taking that process that could be automated away and trying to facilitate that position so that he can have time to do other things.
That's again very interesting thought, because a lot of this we've looked at today is very automatable, isn't it? And you guys have more important things that you have to deal with personally without. So the more we can simplify that, the better. That was very helpful, Kevin. Let's switch to the poll.
Actually, if you don't mind, I'll just keep that open, and you can switch over to next steps, just to give people a chance to answer the long form question if anybody's still typing that up.
Let's do exactly that then. So next slide, please, Reza. Thank you, Katya. So as mentioned, where we go from here, and most of it's on the right-hand side as to what we're hoping will happen over 2023, but the participant survey, again, the 5 boards that took part, they've been generous with their time, and we're looking forward to their thoughtful and more comprehensive feedback on what improvements can be made and where to lead it. We will be, before the end of the year, posting the guidance document that we will welcome everybody's feedback on, but we're hoping that flow diagram will be on everybody's walls by January the 15th, and you can track all of your projects working through the steps there and track your progress on making improvements. As we move into 2023, we will be staying connected with the boards as Kevin said, they make improvements to these schools. We're very interested to see how efficient can these schools be when they're operating them optimally, if you like. So the operations, the controls, the scheduling, but all those things are set up as best they can be. Just how efficient can these schools be? Then we think we'll see something a bit more definitive about design and equipment variations that can really have a big impact going forward that can be more useful. So the plan is to focus on those 10 schools, implement improvements, and over the course of 2023, let's see just how good they can be. From there, we're hoping that we'll be having another Sustainable Schools Research Week this time next year, and we can present to everybody there. This is where we got to. This is the updated look of this. You'll find that information on our website. Sustainable Schools always keeps up to date as we learn more. So every few months you'll see updates there. But we'll be tracking savings, we'll be tracking improvements, and our happy space would be a year from now. All 10 of these schools are at the top of the benchmark chart. They are all at or better than the target savings that we set for ourselves. So this is the plan going into 2023. Again, please stay engaged, stay involved. And the final slide, I think, Teresa. So you all know Katia, please contact us. You know where the website is and the news will always be there as the story unfolds, and working with other partners right now on if you like the next round of cohort projects with school boards. If you're so inclined, we'll let you know what we have in mind. We look forward to hearing from you if these are projects that you'd want to be involved with. Thanks again to the sponsors of this program and all the industry players who give so much, again, technical advice as well as financial support to making the work happen. Have to shout out again to the IESO. Love the work that you're doing to help advance the agenda. So it's beyond incentives, it's into filling knowledge gaps. And finally, thank you all for taking the time this afternoon. This is important to us. We think it's important work. We know everybody's busy, and have a great day, and please stay tuned. Goodbye.